What is the scariest experience you have gone through? Story 1. Work in a mental health unit. Only 2 staff on at night. The other staff member went to lie down for a few minutes as she was doing a double shift. I had my back turned for about 15 seconds when a very sick man, newly diagnosed with schizophrenia, came behind me and got me in a chokehold. One of the scariest positions to be in. Even in our self-defense training, our trainers pretty much said, if someone gets you from behind in a hold, do whatever you need to do to survive. I'm a pretty small person, so I really couldn't move, despite flailing like crazy. He had my arms pinned between his legs so I couldn't reach for my panic alarm. The whole time he was singing Tiny Dancer into my ear. Thank whatever higher powers out there that another patient had woken up for some Tylenol. I was seeing stars at this point, could feel my eyes bulging out of my head. I just remember thinking this is how I was going to die, and wondering who would take care of my dog. And then everything went black. I woke up on a medical unit. I guess I'd pointed to a sign at the last second behind our nursing desk that instructs how to call a code white, violent patient. And the patient who woke up did it successfully and kicked the guy holding me in the face to get him off me before security arrived. Still pretty traumatizing. I still see the patient who saved me on the unit every once in a while. I always buy him some chocolate bars and coffee when he's here. Story 2. When I was a teenager, I had an irregular heart rhythm and required a medication called adenosine. Adenosine is usually given via infusion, just once or twice, in a hospital under careful monitoring, and the side effects include an impending sense of doom. This side effect relates to your heartbeat temporarily stopping. This fires signals to your brain, telling you it's time to panic, or that you've reached the end. Impending sense of doom doesn't begin to describe it. I was told in advance, but nothing prepares you for it. I went from sitting on the hospital bed, having just finished a sandwich and thinking about my year 11 exam, to suddenly being certain that I was going to die right there. I've never felt so sure of anything. I couldn't move or speak, and my mind suddenly raced so fast that I couldn't keep up with my own thoughts. It was similar to what you hear about your life flashing before your eyes. My brain was drowning and telling me to find more oxygen, even though I was breathing fine. I was suddenly sure this was a nightmare, that the hospital was fake, that all the doctors and nurses were actors, and I had been poisoned. Then it was over in seconds. I haven't had a single heart problem since. Story 3. I got caught in a rock slide and fell off a cliff while backpacking. Early spring, things were starting to melt, and we were hiking on a ridge, looking for a way down the side, maybe a 60 to 70 degree loose scree slope, to a stream about 500 feet below. I was in the lead, heading down at an angle, when rocks kicked out from under my feet, and I fell backwards onto my butt. All of a sudden, the entire slope around me began to move en masse, like an island of broken up rocks with me sitting in the middle. I rode it down the hill, bouncing off stuff and trying to stop myself and dig in, but no luck, just picking up speed. At the bottom, the hill dropped off to a 40-foot cliff, and I was launched off with the slide. I landed in a pile of debris and loose material that had previously come down, including a lot of loose snow, which mostly absorbed the impact. I was mostly okay, muddy, lots of scratches and bruises, a separated shoulder and broken tailbone, but I was able to walk out. My one vivid memory is being in midair, time standing still, and looking to my left at a stove-sized boulder, likewise suspended in the air, about 6 feet away. Any good-sized rock could have killed me. Story 4. Giving birth to my son, they put him on my chest for about 5 seconds, then snatched him up, and an entire team of medical staff crowded around him, working in complete silence. He wasn't breathing. I got to see him for all of 3 seconds and only heard a couple of weak cries before they rushed him to the NICU. 2 hours later, they came up to tell us he was on a ventilator and not doing great. They suspected a heart defect and were going to helicopter him to the closest children's hospital, about 90 miles away. We did not get to see him for 5 hours, and it was a couple of days before we could hold him. I gave birth at midnight, so all of this was happening in the late hours. A couple of relatively common issues had happened, both of which on their own need immediate attention, but are not difficult to deal with. However, the resolution of one caused serious problems because of the second. His heart is fine. He's a perfectly happy, healthy preschooler now who is squirting bathwater into the tub faucet and laughing hysterically. Story 5. I suffered from an illness with no name for years. When I got sick, I would urinate blood and be violently ill. I didn't think it was a problem, as I was told I was going to grow out of it. Childhood nephritis. So imagine my shock when I hit 19 and felt like I was going to die. I went to the doctor's office to see a GP, but they had closed early for a Christmas party. I forced them to open the door to deal with me. The GP said, "We need an ambulance now," and I was taken into the ambulance and sent to the ER. While in the ER, they took blood and found I was suffering from hyperkalemia, too much potassium in my blood, which was causing my heart rate to hit the 200s. I was on the verge of a stroke or heart attack. I was admitted to the hospital and immediately put on medication to lower the levels so I wouldn't die, but I kept vomiting black bile. I thought, this is it. This is how I die. Not doing something heroic or awesome, but in a hospital bed alone, vomiting and wanting nothing more than my mom and dad. I was honestly scared out of my mind and couldn't stop crying. Apparently after that, I was put into a medical coma and pumped full of more drugs and given emergency dialysis. My kidneys had failed, and I was dying of blood poisoning. When I woke up, I had missed my birthday, and it was roughly 2 weeks later. I had a dialysis machine attached to a chest line and a dialysis nurse trying to keep me calm, but I was choking to death. So I ended up pulling the ventilator out of my mouth, and a long pipe came with it. I started coughing violently and almost vomited, but there was nothing to come out, so I just dry heaved a lot and pulled a lot of muscles. Later, I was told my kidneys had failed. I was lucky to be alive and doubly lucky that I didn't clot and suffer a stroke or a heart attack. I was as weak as a newborn and could barely lift my arms after a while. I remained in the hospital for 3 months, receiving rehabilitation because I couldn't speak or walk properly. After 6 months, I was basically back to being me, just struggling with this new condition that had basically ruined my life and my plans. Story 6. I was visiting some family in Edmonton years and years ago, and they used to have this big fair full of rides and attractions. I wish I could remember the name. Sorry. All the rides were your standard carnival rides, the Gravitron, Tilt-A-Whirl, Log Flume, etc. I had gone to many of these traveling fairs in my time and had a good time, so I thought nothing of it. After going on a few rides and having fun, I decided to go on that ride. That is the boat that goes back and forth before going all the way around. At the beginning, everything seemed fine. However, at a certain point when going backward, the safety bar that was supposed to hold me in place just fell forward. It had not locked in, and the ride was underway. The ride started heading the other way, and the safety bar fell back onto me again. I pulled it as hard toward myself, hoping to lock it into place. Yet when we started heading back, the bar just flopped completely open again. I was terrified. I literally thought I was going to fall out of this ride and die. All those carnival horror stories seemed true. I just wrapped my arms around the bar and held myself with my hands. If the worst happened, I thought, I would dangle from the bar. Fortunately, after a rocky ride, it came to an end, and I was safe, maybe only leaving my seat a few inches. I immediately ran to one of the workers after I got off and told them. The ride was shut down for 30 minutes afterward, and I was done having fun for the night. The only other time I've been that scared since was the few times I've had sleep paralysis. Story 7. A morning within a few days of Christmas Eve, my oldest son, he was 4 at the time, had flu-like symptoms that turned terrifying. We were relaxing, watching TV, as he seemed out of it, and I was lucky my wife recognized the warning signs. His stomach was sucking in and extending with each breath. It clicked that he was struggling to breathe. We called 911, and they said while we waited for responders to take him out into the cold air without a jacket, it might help his congestion somehow. My wife was on the phone, and I was standing in the driveway holding my little boy, and he was gasping now, his face taking on a tinge of blue. All I could do was hold him and tell him it's okay, it's going to be all right. Stay calm, nice big breaths, buddy. I felt so powerless and small. All I could do was hold him, soothe him, wait and not lose it. For him. The firefighters arrived first and rushed up our yard with oxygen. They cheered for him and told him what a brave boy he was and that everything was going to be all right. My wife went into the ambulance with him while they kept him on oxygen, and they drove off because we had our second son, a baby at the time. I called my dad to come watch him, and he was over in an instant and drove me to the hospital. The whole time there, I didn't know what my boy was going through or if he was okay. I got there, and he was doing great. Some steroids did the trick, and after a fun time hanging out with the doctors, we went home the same night with some precautionary meds. I collapsed in my wife's arms while taking a shower after he fell asleep, trying not to let my big, ugly sobs wake him up. I've never felt so powerless in my life, and it was the scariest thing I've ever gone through, including other situations where I thought I might die. Story 8. I was robbed at gunpoint in 2001. I was living outside of Detroit and worked at an ACO hardware, yes, ACO, not ACE, as a lead cashier. I don't know if they still do this, as I don't live in Michigan anymore, but they used to have these weekly flyers that always had a coupon for some ridiculous deal, like 10 cents for a box cutter or something else that was a lost leader. It was super common for people to come in just to get their coupon item and nothing else. So it was a super busy Saturday, just after my lunch break, and I'd just gotten back on my till. We had lines out to the parking lot, and I got into the speed zone, just trying to get people cashed out without being rude. A guy walked up and put his coupon for a pack of light bulbs for $1.50. Crazy what details stick in the mind. On the conveyor belt along with 2 singles. I smiled, asked how he was, rang him up, and immediately opened the register as I saw his payment right there. The next thing I knew, he was opening his coat and pulling a gun on me, hissing, "Give me all your money." I swear the first thought I had was, why does he have that toy gun and why is he pointing it at me? I just stood there staring at him in confusion. This pissed him off, and he cocked the pistol. It was a slide action one. Again, funny what you remember. And shoved it closer to me, repeating, "I said, give me your money." Then it hit me that it was a real gun, and I think I just went into autopilot. I took all the money out of my till and shoved it toward him. He gathered it up and booked it out the door. I just stood there, and my coworker across the way started calling my name until I finally looked at her with a completely calm face and said, "I think someone just robbed me." Then my legs gave out, and I just fell down and couldn't stop shaking. It only hit me then how I could have just died. Later, after the statement and the cops and everything, my coworkers and I guessed it was a friend of someone who worked there, because they knew to hit my till, since I was head cashier, which had the most money. I still sometimes see that guy with his gun in nightmares. As far as I know, they never caught him. I don't think hardware store robberies were high on their list of priorities. Story 9. I was 16 at the time, and I spent the night at a friend's house. There were supposed to be 4 of us there that night, but there were only 3. We were covering for our 4th friend, who decided to spend the weekend with her boyfriend, an older guy we all found very questionable. So we're hanging out, listening to music. It's almost midnight, and the phone rings. It's our 4th friend. She and her boyfriend got into a fight, and he put her out of his house. She's calling from a payphone because he kept her cell. We're like, "This is serious. Tell us where you are and we'll come get you." She's in Baltimore, Maryland. My first reaction was, we should get my dad. This is serious and we need an adult. The other 2 freaked out and pointed out how much trouble we'd be in if a parent got involved. I argued she was alone, no phone, on the streets of a big city at midnight, over 200 miles from home, and we needed to help her. They used my own argument against me. She could be in real trouble and we're wasting time. So we printed directions, loaded into my unreliable car, and off we went. At that point, the biggest city I'd ever driven in was Charlottesville. We made the 2-hour trip, arrived in this huge city in another state at 2:30 a.m. with no one knowing where we were. We pulled up to the store where our friend had called from, and she wasn't there. We asked the guy inside, and he said she had argued with someone and left with him after the clerk threatened to call the cops. So we started driving around, hoping she was nearby. The store seemed to be in walking distance, so she had to be close. One of my friends had the idea that if she left with the guy, maybe she got her phone back. We called, and yeah, she was with him. Everything was fine. They were talking, and he was apologizing. We told her we were actually in the city because we were scared and worried something bad had happened. She told us we blew things out of proportion and asked which parent we brought. When we said we were alone, her tone changed completely. She called us sweet, said we were the best friends ever, and asked us to swing by and meet her boyfriend. We got directions and rolled up. The guy was acting all nice, apologizing, saying our friend was emotional, and he was glad she had such great friends. But he was still creeping us out. He invited us in. We declined. He insisted. We said maybe later that we were going to the store for a drink first. Our friend came along, and when the guy tried to come too, we told him we didn't have space. He said she could sit on his lap. One of my friends said that was a bad idea since there were cops nearby, and we didn't want trouble. He agreed and said cops there were strict. Our friend wanted to stay with him, but we convinced her to ride with us so we wouldn't get lost. He invited us to stay the night, saying we didn't want to drive home so late. We told him our parents didn't know where we were and that we'd just go grab drinks, bring his girlfriend back, and try to make it home before anyone noticed. He asked again if we'd come back and meet his friends. We said sure, after the store. He kissed our friend and told her to convince us to stay. Once we were near the store, her attitude changed completely. She told us there had been a big argument about his friends being there and that she didn't feel safe alone with them. After he kicked her out, she was terrified, and when he came back looking for her, she went with him because the streets felt worse. She was relieved when we said we were in town and had wanted to talk to us alone. She wanted to go home. She was really scared we'd agree to stay overnight. So we drove past the store and headed home. The guy started calling about 10 minutes later, asking what was taking so long. She told him I was in the bathroom and it was my car. Another 10 minutes and he called again. She said one of us felt sick and we'd be back soon. Then he walked to the store and found out we weren't there. At that point, we told her to turn off her phone. In the end, we made it home and stopped at our local 7-Eleven for slushies just in case our friend's mom was up. During the ride, we tried to convince our 15-year-old friend to break up with the 25-year-old guy. She insisted she loved him and said we weren't mature enough to understand. We reminded her he left her on the streets of Baltimore at midnight. She said we just didn't get him. We reminded her that she called us scared and only went back because she thought it was the lesser evil. She ended up staying with him for a few more months. He eventually broke up with her when he came to visit and tried to pressure her into something she didn't want. When she said no, he got angry, said terrible things, and told her she meant nothing to him. That really messed her up for a long time. And honestly, none of our parents ever found out that 14 girls went out of state in the middle of the night. To this day, I still think we should have gotten an adult. We should have told her mom about the boyfriend the moment we got home. But teenagers make dumb choices, and we were lucky things didn't go worse than they did. Story 10. My mom was in ICU for a month when I was 18. She'd come out of ICU and been moved to a regular room, and she seemed to be getting better. I had a scholarship to college, and she told me to go. I did, even though I didn't want to. This was my one shot, but I wanted to stay and be there for her. She told me to go, so I did. On the second day of classes, I got a call at 5 a.m. She'd arrested. She had no living will, so they brought her back, but she was on life support and had no brain activity. I had to sign the papers to turn off the machines. I was 18, and she was my only family. I'm 51 now, and I'm tearing up as I write this. I still carry the weight of feeling like I caused my mother's death. Yes, I know. Brain dead. They did scans, the neurologist advised me. I've had counseling. But at the end of the day, I signed the papers, they turned off the machines, and my mother passed. And then I was alone. Make a living will. Don't ever put your children or spouse through what I went through. Story 11. When my daughter was about 2, she started choking on something. I tilted her upside down and beat on her back, but nothing came up. She was making zero noise, fully suffocating. I was a complete mess, thinking she was going to die in my arms. Just as I rushed out the door to jump in my van for the hospital, she started whining and coughing. It was the best sound of my life. I took her to her pediatrician right away. They sent us to the hospital for an x-ray to see if the object had been swallowed or possibly shifted in her airway. When we got home, there was a bloody nickel on the kitchen floor where the incident had happened. The whole thing probably lasted 20 seconds, but it felt like a nightmare in slow motion. That event actually pushed me to pursue an EMT career. I completed EMT Basic and later decided it wasn't the field for me. But the training was invaluable. I learned CPR and the Heimlich maneuver, skills that I believe every caregiver should know. I'll carry that knowledge forever. Story 12. I went hiking with my brother. Never hike alone, something I've always been taught, and I'm glad I followed it because I would probably be gone if I hadn't had a partner. We lived in the Ozark mountain range and hiked almost daily. It was December 26th, and there was about 1.5 feet of snow on the ground. We were traversing a mountain path we'd hiked hundreds of times before, but the deep snow made it difficult to recognize familiar landmarks and dangers. We came near a dangerous cliff face with a 45-degree decline that went about 25 yards, followed by a 75-foot vertical drop onto a dried-up creek bed, basically solid rock. I got too close and lost my footing. I started sliding and grabbed for trees and rocks, but there was a layer of ice under the snow and nothing held. I slid all the way down and went off the edge, but miraculously, I landed on a tree below. I hit every branch, which slowed me down, and then I landed on the rock bed, left leg first. I shattered my tibia and fibula in 7 places. I stood up in shock, but my leg collapsed under me. I looked down and saw blood in the snow and my bones sticking out. The pain hit me hard. I panicked, then calmed myself enough to yell up to my brother. He asked if I was okay, and I yelled that my leg was broken and bleeding badly. I took off my belt and tied it around my leg, just in case I needed to control the bleeding. I told him to send our GPS coordinates to my mom, who was actually a search and rescue responder. He threw down his shirt and jacket to keep me warm and hiked 50 minutes back home to get help. I sat alone for 7 hours, trying to stay calm. Finally, I heard my brother yelling that search and rescue had arrived and were working their way to me. When they reached me, they checked my vitals and kept me talking. One guy asked my name, my favorite food, and where I was born. Anything to keep me focused. He gave me a shot of morphine, then they wrapped me in a foil blanket to retain body heat. They placed me in a body bag, leaving my face open to breathe, and strapped me to a stretcher. The next thing I remember was seeing my mom, stepdad, grandparents, and family as they loaded me into an EMS vehicle. I got another shot of something and woke up in the hospital with a cast on. It was the most intense, adrenaline-filled experience of my life. I truly believe it was one of those barely made it out alive stories you see on TV. To this day, I volunteer with search and rescue in the fire department. You never know when life will throw something at you. I'm lucky and forever grateful to the people who saved me that day. Story 13. This is going to sound really strange, but my dad once threatened to end both our lives over my grades. Last year, I was a sophomore during remote learning, and I was struggling with a trigonometry class. I asked my parents for a tutor, and they agreed. However, the tutor was very expensive. Every day I would do my homework with him, and he helped me understand the material perfectly. I'd get an A on the homework and the study guide, but I kept failing the tests. 5 tests in a row. After one tutoring session, I was in the car with my dad. He asked me about my grades, and because I was frustrated, I told him I hated school and that I was feeling extremely low and overwhelmed. That's when he said something terrifying. He told me he wanted to drive to the highway and end everything for both of us. He hated his job, and he said he felt the same way. He started speeding toward the highway, running multiple red lights. At one of them, I got out of the car. He pulled me back in and asked what I was doing. I told him I was going to walk into the nearby fast food restaurant and call the police. He then told me that his own son would betray him and that our bond meant nothing. After that, he drove us back home. We have never spoken about it since. I told my mom, and she said I deserved it. I still live with both of them, and I'm very depressed and have a hard time doing any schoolwork. Story 14. I was driving home after picking up a pizza and came around a bend in the road to see a hedge next to a mobile home on fire. There was nobody around except for one other person who had pulled over and was on the phone. I stopped and looked for my phone but couldn't find it, so I left my vehicle to assess the situation. As I got out, there were a series of explosions from the house and lots of shouting. The person on the roadside had one hand on his head, looking very concerned, clearly on the phone with emergency services. I walked to the edge of the road and saw a large 20-foot hedge on fire, rapidly intensifying and spreading to a nearby mobile home. Then I saw a man run full speed past me and disappear behind the house in the flames. Another person pulled up behind me, did the same thing, and asked if everyone was out. I said I wasn't sure but had seen someone run toward the house. He said we should make sure everyone was safe and jumped the fence, so I followed him. We went over a rock wall and around a garden shed to find a semi-conscious woman with burn injuries and another man, his face covered in soot, just 15 feet from the intense fire. I didn't know what to do. My instinct was to help move her, but the man was dragging her toward the truck, and for a second, I froze. I realized they were trying to lift her into the vehicle to get her to safety because she couldn't move on her own. One of the men saw us and told us the house was about to explode and we should leave immediately. After my companion confirmed no one else was inside, and I saw them loading her into the truck, we ran back to safety. The whole ordeal lasted maybe 30 to 45 seconds, but was terrifying. The hedge fire spread quickly, was incredibly loud, and was starting to trigger more small explosions as it hit the house. I went through all three adrenaline stages: fight, ready to help; freeze, unsure of what I was witnessing; and flight, when it was clear we were in danger and not needed. It was an intense, somewhat traumatic experience. The woman suffered third-degree burns to her face and arms, and another man suffered from smoke inhalation. Both were transported by ambulance but survived. Last I heard, she was recovering in the burn unit. She truly owes her life to the two men who pulled her out, as it took nearly 10 minutes for the fire department to arrive, by which point the home was completely engulfed. Story 15. My perception of time is a bit off, but I think this happened last summer. I was out camping with my wife, now ex, and our kids, and we decided to go swimming. The kids were playing on the beach, and my wife and I decided to swim out to the boundary line and back. About 80% of the way there, we both got exhausted. We had completely underestimated the strength of the wind and current we were swimming against. We turned around to go back, and that's when we hit the wall. We couldn't touch the bottom and were already out of breath from fighting the current. We both started to hyperventilate, and each called toward the shore once. The beach was almost empty, with only 2 adults and 2 kids sitting far on the opposite side, likely unaware of what was happening. As we slipped into panic and my wife started to go under, I used every bit of strength I had left to encourage her to keep going. Suddenly, I could just barely touch the bottom with my toes. I grabbed her arm and dragged her forward in the water until she could touch too. We managed to make it back to shore. I've been swimming hundreds, maybe thousands of times. I grew up on a lake, but never in my life have I felt so close to drowning. Afterward, we packed up and left camp that day. We fell asleep at our campsite under a tree, exhausted and shaken. For several days after, I was mentally not okay. It was a mistake I'd never made before, and definitely never will again. We should have known better. But the bay we were in was so wide that the safety line looked much closer than it really was. On a calm day, we might have made it out and back. But it was windy, and the current was far stronger than we realized, until it was nearly too late. Story 16. I was robbed at gunpoint in 2005. I worked for an Advance Auto Parts in coastal South Carolina. 2 of our stores had been robbed in a 3-week period on Sunday nights, and we were all nervous that we could be next. Sure enough, it happened. A little background: I was the 3rd key manager at this store, and I had one other person with me, whose father happened to be a local police officer. Anyway, our Sunday night was already stressful. We had the general manager watching the store from across the street. Around closing time, we wanted to celebrate and order pizza. We asked the GM to pick it up. My coworker started bringing in outside merchandise when we got hit. A short man in a ski mask, actually a beanie with cutout eye holes, and a ball cap came in, pointing a gun at us. I'm fairly big in stature, but I was terrified. He pointed the gun directly at me and demanded we go to the safe. I opened it with the weapon to my head, and then he made us lay on the floor. He cleared it out and started yelling at me about the money. The daytime manager had already made an early deposit and locked up the PC in a locker. This guy was getting angrier, and I explained the situation as best I could. It's because of you. After you hit 2 other stores, they started making daily deposits. That's a paraphrase. Mostly I was stammering, saying, "Please, sir," and "Yes, sir." He had us empty the registers and made us lie down again before he ran out. When the police showed up, they were not kind. They said we should have fought the guy, especially me, since I'm bigger. Everything was caught on camera. A little about me: I'm a big guy, but I don't go looking for fights. I don't mind sports, but I've never liked physical confrontation unless absolutely necessary. I've only felt the need to hit someone a few times in my life. My coworker's dad showed up later and said, "I had a feeling I should have checked on them because of everything, but I just didn't." So we were robbed, criticized by law enforcement, and not treated seriously. I've had some lasting trauma from that night. I still wonder if I was a coward. The video clearly shows a few moments when I might have had a chance to act, but I was frozen, terrified. The gun was pointed right at me. When they caught the guy, it turned out the gun had no bullets. Still, typing this out made me realize I've never fully processed that night. Maybe I still have something to work through. Story 17. I can't really recall a situation that completely terrified me, but one that came close happened in the early years of high school. Second year, I'm from Scotland. There was a guy I'd known since primary school who officially had anger issues, but I always suspected he had more going on. Maybe bipolar disorder. He came from a very rough background, divorced parents, drugs, and his father had passed away while we were still in school. One day he followed me home after school. I'd had problems with him for years and had been in a few fights with him, so being alone with him instantly put me on edge. We ended up in a 2-level car park, mostly deserted. I could tell he was trying to provoke me. I'd seen this pattern before, so the moment he dropped his guard, I punched him in the eye and made a run for it. I had to cross a busy road to get home. While crossing, something happened. To this day, I don't know exactly what, but suddenly I was on the ground, in the middle of the road, and a car was coming straight toward me. I didn't move. I was too low to be seen and preparing to defend myself in case he came after me again. The only reason I wasn't hit was because he was still on the road, and the car saw him first, causing it to stop just in time. After that, the fight continued. It ended in a draw, but he came out worse than I did. I got home safely afterward. Looking back, I realize how lucky I was not to be seriously hurt or worse. That moment in the road still sticks with me. Story 18. When I was 11 years old, my neighbor was using a bulldozer to clear out part of the wooded area on his property. We lived in a very rural area. Although our property lines touched at the back, it would have taken about 20 minutes to walk from our driveway to theirs. In this wooded area, which our neighbors generally said we could play in, I had created a little hiding spot. Just a hollow in the ground surrounded by a big stump and fallen trees. On the day of the bulldozing, I was watching from the edge of the woods when I had the worst idea. Wouldn't it be better to watch from inside my hiding place? So I climbed in while my neighbor was facing the other way. I peeked through a large hole in the stump, but something was wrong. He hadn't appeared on the other side. The stump started moving, fast. To my horror, my feet were caught in the clay and roots. I fell on my back, screaming, but no one could hear me over the sound of the machine. I shook the bushes trying to get his attention, but it was no use. The stump pushed further and further up my legs. Sometimes it paused while the bulldozer repositioned, but then it would continue. It couldn't have taken long, but it felt like forever. I truly believed I was going to die, buried under earth and wood with no one knowing what happened. When the stump reached my waist, something miraculous happened. It stopped. The bulldozer turned off. Suddenly, I could hear myself screaming. My neighbor, my sisters, and my mom all came running down. And somehow, my little dog Cookie was licking my face. 3 hours, 20 volunteer firefighters, 2 jaws of life, and an ambulance later, I found out why I was alive. Cookie, my scruffy little schnauzer, had saved me. She must have heard me screaming or sensed something was wrong. She jumped on top of the stump and barked nonstop at the bulldozer like it was a predator. My neighbor stopped the machine to avoid hurting her, and that's when he finally heard me. My injuries weren't too bad considering. I had a broken leg in a few places, several surgeries, and I was in a wheelchair for a few months. Cookie and I made the front page in every city in the county. 2 different pet food companies gave her a year's supply of food. She's no longer with us, but she'll always be the best dog I could have ever asked for. I miss you, girl. Story 19. My ex-boyfriend. I met him on a dating app, and things seemed to go well at first. He was nice, wanted the same things I did, and said all the right things. But over time, I started noticing red flags. This might be a bit personal, so fair warning. At the beginning, the intimacy was great, some of the best I'd experienced at that time. But he had a strange aversion to adult products. I, on the other hand, really liked them, especially vibrators. I can understand someone not wanting to use them during intimacy, but he didn't want me to even mention them. Ever. I tried to respect that boundary, but it felt controlling. On our first Valentine's Day together, he showed up 3 hours late. It was a tense day. He was supposed to stay the night at my place, but at about 1 a.m., he woke me up to say he was leaving. He said he had a headache, so I gave him Tylenol, but he still left. The next morning, I noticed I'd accidentally left a vibrator out on the floor. He told me that because of that, he wouldn't be intimate with me again for the foreseeable future. I was shocked, but I reluctantly agreed. Next time we saw each other, he wouldn't touch me. If I touched him, he looked visibly angry. I wanted affection, not just intimacy, but he became cold. Then he initiated intimacy, and I accepted. Afterward, he blamed me for it. He told me I was awful for not respecting his boundaries. I apologized repeatedly, offered to avoid all intimacy until he felt ready again. But he said it was too late, that I had ruined everything, and I should get used to emotionless intimacy for the rest of our relationship. From that point on, he used it to manipulate me. He stopped trying at all. There was no emotion, no care. He said he was only doing it because I wanted it, even when he initiated. The only time it lasted longer than 5 minutes after that was when I was asleep or trying to fall asleep. He argued with me constantly. I met his parents, and when we left, I said something like, "They weren't as bad as I was expecting." It was meant neutrally, but he exploded. He said I couldn't understand his pain growing up with them, and how dare I say that. Eventually, he bought a firearm. That made me extremely uncomfortable. At one point, he pointed it near me while showing it off. It wasn't loaded, but I still felt deeply unsettled. That moment was one of the reasons I ended things. Not the last straw, but close. Another time, he got mad and threw his phone across the room. When it broke, he got angrier. Then he went on a rant about how his ex used to get scared when he did things like that. He constantly talked about his ex, calling her names, saying he knew her passwords and could ruin her life if he wanted. He described in detail how he'd insulted her and how she deserved it. The final straw was after we had a great date. I was happy. We got back to his place and the intimacy was disappointing. Again. It lasted less than 5 minutes and felt completely one-sided. I still left feeling okay about the relationship. But on the hour-long drive back to my house, he sent a long message blaming me for everything. He said that if I hadn't crossed his boundaries months ago, he wouldn't be this way and that I had ruined it permanently. We argued again. I told him, "You're venting to me about me." That's when it clicked. I couldn't take anymore. I broke up with him over text a few hours later because I was terrified of what he'd do. I went to a friend's house, and I was right to be scared. He drove an hour to my house even after I told him not to. He tried to talk to me. The next morning, he showed up at my job to drop off lunch. I had an anxiety attack in the break room. I wanted to leave but couldn't. We were understaffed. 2 weeks later, he came back to my work again. My manager had to escort him away. So he went to my house and talked to my dad. I drove home to see him crying on my porch. After that, he stalked my online accounts and sent me messages referencing things I had posted. I had to create a new account and block him everywhere. He left me 2 voicemails a few months ago, but I haven't heard from him since, probably because I blocked everything. Still, every time I'm outside, I worry I'll see him. I was scared he might show up with a weapon. I still fear he'll show up at my school. I live with anxiety every day. I know if I had stayed, things would have gotten worse. I truly hope his ex never goes back to him and that no one else ever has to go through what I did. I struggle with trust. I bought pepper spray. I have nightmares. I just want him to stay out of my life forever. It's terrifying how fast things can spiral. I felt like one of those frogs in a pot with the water slowly heating until it was too late. Story 20. I got ambushed by some very angry guys with hunting rifles in Birmingham, Alabama. There was a massive misunderstanding about something the other 2 people I was traveling with had done. We were separated at the time, so I took the blame. I didn't even know what was happening when they pulled up in a truck, yelling and threatening me, saying they'd hurt me if I didn't say where my friends were. They were threatening to go after them too, and there was this intense moment where I used a passing freight train as cover to separate myself from them and just ran. They were not bluffing. I truly thought I was in danger. I ended up hiding in a creek bed, calling my friends and telling them to disappear fast. Then the truck appeared again, 15 feet away on the road. I made a split-second decision and left my gear behind so I could run faster through the woods. I spent a long time hiding and panicking while they searched, shouting and making noise. I had a can of Dr. Pepper in my vest and was so thirsty, but didn't want to risk opening it and making noise. Eventually, things went quiet. I had to go back for my gear, even though I feared they'd be waiting for me. Luckily, it was untouched, though soaked. I carefully slipped away and reunited with my friends who were hiding deep in the woods a couple of miles away. I've been through some wild experiences, maybe even worse ones, But the Birmingham incident is the one that still shakes me. It was recent, intense, and completely real. I'll never forget how close I felt to danger that night. Story 21. I woke up just at dawn to a thunderous boom and a roar that sounded like a jet engine coming from far southwest of the house. It was so deep the doors and windows were rattling, but the sound stayed steady. It wasn't getting louder or softer. As the noise continued, I started feeling a little less anxious and went to the sink to pour water for our morning coffee. Just as I turned on the tap, I looked out the kitchen window and saw the sky light up with a rolling firewall of red and yellow flames moving in all directions across the entire sky, including toward us. Terrified and thinking the worst, I rushed into the bedroom and woke my wife. I held her and kissed her, telling her that this might be it. Fortunately, the glow faded quickly once all the loose gas burned off. It turns out a large underground natural gas pipeline, 13 inches wide, I believe, had burst, causing the initial boom. That led to a huge pressurized gas release, which created the roaring sound that the wind carried south of town, where it finally ignited. The flames continued for a while, reaching 400 feet into the sky, and were eventually contained to about a quarter-mile radius until the source was shut off. Shortly after, I turned on the police scanner. The first dispatch came from a town 12 miles east. When responders stepped outside, they called in saying in disbelief that the incident wasn't in their jurisdiction. Meanwhile, another town 15 miles to the south was alerted by a truck driver who said he could see the flame column directly in front of him and was pulling over. Our town, despite being the closest, was actually the third to report it, even though our team was already en route. It was impossible to miss. Story 22. I was invited to a traditional ayahuasca ceremony when I was 18. I can't truly put the experience into words. Most of it was deeply beautiful. But at one point, I found myself overwhelmed by unbearable pain radiating from my gut. It was both physical and emotional, worse than anything I had ever imagined. My body began to seize up, and it felt like my organs were shutting down. I started moaning and screaming in a way I had never heard from myself before. It was raw and primal. The shaman tried to help me, fanning me with leaves, blowing tobacco smoke over me, and chanting. He was someone I trusted completely, but I could even sense urgency from him. Others in the ceremony tried to comfort me. They had come down from their own experience, but I had taken a very large dose. Eventually, I reached a point where I had to accept that I might be dying, that this could be the end. Slowly, I began to have moments of awareness. Eventually, I stabilized and was able to rest. For a long time, I was amazed I survived. I genuinely felt reborn, and I don't say that lightly. My senses were like those of a newborn. The light of the jungle hurt my eyes, and even plain rice was overwhelming in flavor. It took me a while before I could speak to anyone again. I'm grateful I had the experience, but that night remains the most terrifying event I've ever gone through. I've had other intense moments with psychedelics, but nothing has ever come close to what I experienced with ayahuasca. Story 23. Me and 7 of my friends went to a sleepover at one of their houses. Her parents slept upstairs while all of us stayed on the first floor. They went to bed early, and we stayed up all night doing random things. Throughout the night, I noticed some weird things in the house, like a door closing on its own or a drawer opening by itself. I brushed it off, thinking it was just the wind. Around 3 a.m., we finally got tired. There were 2 bedrooms on the first floor. 4 of us slept in one, 2 in the other, and the remaining 2, me and another friend, were chosen to sleep on a mattress in the living room. The house was pitch black, and the only light came from my phone. I sat on the mattress while my friend stood in front of me, and we were just chatting. Suddenly, I felt something move on the mattress beside me, like someone had just sat down. I looked to my side. Nothing. Nothing that could have caused the movement. I looked at my friend, and the terrified look on her face told me she had felt it too. Without saying a word, we both screamed and ran to the bedrooms. I was shaking and nearly in tears. We ended up sleeping on the floors in the rooms with our friends. There was no way we were going back to that living room. This happened 2 years ago, and I'm still scared when I think about it. Before that night, I had never experienced anything paranormal, or whatever that was. Story 24. I once attempted to harm myself by taking an excessive amount of Benadryl. I need to say this up front. It's a terrible, terrible idea. It was 3 a.m. and I was alone and scared. This was before the effects fully kicked in. I reached into the backseat of my car to find my cigarettes and saw what looked like a creepy girl sitting there, just staring at me. That was when I realized I was hallucinating. I panicked and ran as far as I could. Big mistake. Now I was lost. What followed was a series of terrifying hallucinations. I saw people arguing around a trash can, spiders way larger than normal, and tall, ominous figures who seemed threatening. I was about 2 miles from home and walked the whole way, constantly seeing things that weren't real. One recurring image was a man and a dog who would appear, run after me, and vanish. The dog would jump at me. The man would scream in my face, then both would disappear, only to return minutes later. When I finally made it home, I went to my room and saw what looked like a person-shaped lump under the blanket beside me. Then came the banging on the closet door. I heard a girl's voice begging me to let her out, jiggling the handle and scratching. That's the last thing I remember. I woke up in the hospital a day later with no memory of what happened after that, aside from a vague moment where I looked at another patient and said, "So do you come here often?" All I can say is, I'm grateful to still be here. Story 25. This will probably get buried, but at the age of 20, I went through critical heart failure and my fourth open heart surgery. It started out like the flu. I just felt like I had a bad cold and some stomach issues, nothing I couldn't handle, so I didn't think much of it. But then it started to get much worse. I began having these episodes where I couldn't stop shaking, so I went to the hospital. I have pulmonary atresia, which is a form of congenital heart disease, something I was born with and can't change. I told the doctors about it, thinking they'd take it into account, but they said it was just a bad cold and sent me home, telling me to rest. Over the next month, everything continued to worsen. I wasn't sleeping, could barely eat, yet I was gaining weight and had no energy. One night, I was shaking violently in bed and ran to the bathroom to vomit, which had become a regular thing, and this time it was all blood. The next day, I returned to the hospital. By that point, I was losing color in my vision, and the walls looked like they were melting. My heart rate was resting at 177 beats per minute, and my blood pressure was 60/40. I had almost no blood flow in my arms. I was on the brink of dying. Thanks to some amazing nurses and doctors, I was rushed by emergency transport to another hospital in the next town. I spent over 150 hours in the ICU, 4 additional weeks in the hospital, and underwent another open heart surgery to remove the infection that had entered my bloodstream. It was a success. All of this happened because of a strep throat bug that got into my mouth and then entered my bloodstream after I accidentally brushed too hard one night. In total, 150 hours in the ICU, a month in the hospital, another major heart surgery, a blood clot in my left lung, and about $2 million in medical bills. I also had to go through a month of infusion treatments and developed significant PTSD, but I wasn't ready to give up. Thanks to my amazing fiancé, my supportive family, and incredible healthcare workers, I found the strength and determination to pull through. Shout out to all the nurses and doctors out there. You don't realize how fragile life is until you're staring down the edge of it. Story 26. Okay, so one hot summer night, my mom and I decided to try some mushrooms. Not a lot, just enough to feel it. At the time, we lived near downtown in an apartment and walked to a nearby park. We got there at dusk, and right when it got dark, the effects kicked in. We lost our sense of depth and got very giggly. We decided to head back home, which was only a few blocks away, but we had to cross a main street, not very busy at the time. As we were crossing, we noticed a man walking alone. As soon as he saw us, he started hitting the top of his head and yelling incoherently. We crossed and started walking up the block quickly. I picked up the pace, being younger, and my mom shouted, "Oh no, this is as fast as I can go." It felt like a horror movie. No matter how fast we walked, the man was always just behind us, walking, never running, but staying right there. Then a white windowless van appeared nearby, which just made things worse. We passed our street and kept walking toward a more residential area, hoping to find someone to help. Eventually, we reached a driveway and turned around, and the man was gone. Huge relief. We continued down the street and saw a couple sitting on their porch. We came up to them, wide-eyed and sweaty, explaining our situation. We asked if they could please walk or drive us home. The gentleman agreed. He could clearly tell what we were experiencing. It was only a few blocks, and we thanked him profusely the whole way. We got out of the car, bowed in gratitude, and turned to the front door of our apartment complex, and there he was, on the other side of the street, just standing there. We froze. There was a moment of eye contact. Then the screaming and head smacking started again. We screamed too and ran to the door. In the panic, we dropped the keys, fumbled with the lock, and finally managed to get inside and fall onto the floor of the entryway. We made it. We ran upstairs and didn't look back. And we never tripped at the park again. Story 27. When I was 10, someone broke into our house. I lived with my mom and my little sister. My stepdad would stay with us on weekends, but that night he wasn't there. Of course, that had to be the night something happened. We always double-checked the locks, especially because of my anxiety, but my mom had forgotten that night. Around midnight, my mom came into my room and whispered, "There's a man in the house." My 10-year-old brain went straight to panic. Are we going to die? My mom told me to stay calm, but I was terrified. She sat on my bed whispering to calm me while trying to figure out what to do. She called my stepdad, no answer. She even called my sister's dad, someone she didn't like at all, but still, no answer. Finally, she called the police. It turned out the man had been drunk and mistakenly entered our apartment, thinking it was his own. He actually lived in the apartment next door. I do feel bad for him. It must have been incredibly embarrassing the next morning, but at the time it was horrifying. I was just a kid. That night stuck with me for a long time. Story 28. We'd gone to an island for Christmas. It was the day before my daughter's second birthday, and we, plus my wife's sister, her husband, and their child, decided to visit one of the spectacular waterfalls. A proper welded-together Mad Max-style truck took us halfway up the mountain, and from there we had to walk the rest of the way. My almost 2-year-old daughter had to be carried, so I picked her up and started up the trail. I'd only gone a short distance before I lost my footing on the damp leaves, slipped, and began sliding, still holding her. At first I wasn't worried. I'd fallen plenty of times before. But this time I kept sliding. I held her head with one hand and reached out with the other, grabbing at anything I could, but nothing stopped us. I looked over my shoulder and saw a drop just meters away. A huge drop, one that no one could survive. With my daughter crying on my chest, I rolled onto my back, holding her tightly, hoping that she, at least, would be okay. Just at the edge, I managed to dig my foot into some vegetation. We stopped. My wife and brother-in-law came scrambling down and quickly took my daughter from my arms. They carried her back while I stayed there, tangled in the bushes, one leg dangling over the cliff. I didn't say a word. I sat there and smoked 2 cigarettes in silence. I didn't speak for the rest of the day. The next morning, when we visited the temple for my daughter's birthday, we truly meant every prayer. Story 29. I guess I should open up a bit, maybe to feel better. I never told my mom, but 2 years ago, when I was 13, I self-harmed for the first and hopefully last time. Everyone else's stories are probably much worse, so maybe mine just sounds like typical teen stuff. I don't know what real trauma or abuse feels like, but still, this is what happened to me. My dad gave me a poor self-image when I was younger. I used to be bigger, weight-wise, and he would shame me for it. He told me I was irresponsible, too negative, too emotional, too soft for society. I just wanted to tell him he was wrong about me. Even after I slimmed down, I couldn't shake the things he said. At 13, I barely saw him anymore. But I still saw parts of him in me. People told me I inherited his good personality traits, but I didn't want to be like him. Not because it wasn't cool, but because I didn't think he was a good person. I was also bullied for my weight. Kids tackled me, made fun of me, and I bottled up so much pain. One day home alone, I had a full breakdown. I screamed. I cried. I tore up papers. I banged my head against the wall. I felt like a disgrace. I kept repeating to myself that I was ugly, stupid, and worthless. I didn't understand why I felt this way. I had a decent life. I thought I didn't deserve to feel sad because others had it worse, especially my mom. That guilt made everything worse. I grabbed a pair of scissors and cut myself. Not badly, just enough to bleed a little. But it was the first time I turned my anger inward physically. I wasn't angry at others, just at myself. When I saw the drop of blood on the carpet, I was shocked. I realized what I had done. I cleaned everything up, including myself. I threw away the torn papers and covered the stain with my backpack. The injury healed quickly, but the emotional pain didn't. I still struggle with it. Sometimes I think about self-harming again. I remember how dry my face felt from crying, how the blood smelled, how I sank into this emotional void, and I never want to feel that way again. Story 30. Probably one of the scariest experiences I've ever had was the night my family and I heard things being thrown and destroyed upstairs in our house. For context, we live in Tamaulipas, Mexico, a region where crime and violence are, unfortunately, part of everyday life. So hearing strange sounds in the middle of the night immediately put us on high alert. It happened around 2 a.m. My brother, my mom, and I decided to go outside and check the house. We weren't unfamiliar with break-in attempts, so for protection, I took a knife and my brother brought a sharp screwdriver. As we carefully and quietly moved upstairs, the noises grew louder. It sounded like someone was smashing dishes and kicking the walls. When we reached the door to the room where the sounds were coming from, we realized it was locked. That was odd. Why would a burglar lock themselves in? I unlocked the door, expecting to confront someone, but the moment it opened, everything was silent. Not a single thing was broken. Nothing was out of place. The room was perfectly normal. And the noise? It had stopped entirely. We never figured out what caused it. It still creeps us out. We've always had strange things happen in the house, unexplainable stuff, but nothing ever as intense as that night. And to this day, it still gives me chills. Story 31. I don't really know how I feel about it, but when I was younger, both my parents were living under the same roof, even though they absolutely hated each other. In that house, there was a large closet at the top of the stairs and a mirror positioned in such a way that you could see into the living room from above without being seen. One morning, I was awake unusually early, rare for me since I've always struggled with insomnia, and I looked into the mirror. I saw my parents arguing downstairs. For context, my dad kept putting handmade wooden chairs outside in the rain because he didn't like them. My mom, who's calm and intelligent, would bring them back in and ask him not to do that. This time she was fed up and poured his cup of tea into the sink to show how ridiculous his actions were. He nearly choked her for it. He grabbed her by the neck and held her so tight that one of my older sisters, who was just 12 at the time, had to beg him to let go. She was sobbing and screaming. I was 6 years old watching it all from upstairs, not understanding what any of it meant. Story 32. This isn't exactly my story, but my mom told it to me once. Not too long ago, in the outskirts of our town, there was a ghost town that many people believed was a gateway to something dark. There were rumors about groups who took goats, dogs, cats, and even abducted kids or women to perform rituals. Victims were sometimes found in a nearby river, cut into pieces, left in bags. My uncle, a big fan of horror and occult fiction, visited the place during the day a few times. He saw groups in robes, people living on the streets, and strange graffiti all over the walls. Things like symbols and drawings of figures like Baphomet. That place is now being torn down and turned into a family-friendly neighborhood. One of my classmates actually used to live near there. He claimed he could see ghosts at night, and that his family had to lock every door inside their house because spirits would wander around. They took it seriously. But here's the creepiest part. The night before I was born, around 2 or 3 a.m., my grandma received a call from a payphone. The woman on the other end sounded exactly like my mom. She said something like, "Mom, I need help. They're coming to take me." My grandma asked where she was and who they were, but there was no answer. Concerned, she called my mom immediately, but everything was fine. The next day, authorities found a woman's body in the river. She had been dismembered and placed in several bags. Story 33. It happened over a year ago. My sister and I sometimes stayed up late just talking about our problems before school. That night, after we talked for a while, she went to the bathroom. She was in there for about half an hour, way longer than usual. Eventually, I convinced her to come out. She told me she was okay and said she just wanted to talk to her cat. I didn't really think much of it. Note, I have autism. It doesn't really impair me, but I tend to take things literally and have trouble telling when someone's lying. Time passed, and we were almost ready to go to school when she started complaining about stomach pain. Our guardian didn't believe her and thought she was just trying to get out of going to school. But something didn't sit right with me. I pressed her a bit, and she finally admitted that she had drunk bleach or some kind of cleaning solution.